The rain had been falling since dusk, steady and cold, turning the streets of Seattle into long mirrors of light, and inside the small blue house at the corner of Pine Street, Emma Harper felt a strange pressure in the air, the kind that made her heart beat faster for no clear reason, because Daniel was quiet in a way he had never been before, sitting across from her at the kitchen table with his shoulders tight and his eyes fixed on his hands, as if he were holding something fragile that might break if he looked up. Emma tried to fill the silence by talking about ordinary things, the grocery list, the neighbor's new dog, the way the rain sounded heavier than usual, but Daniel only nodded, his answers short, distant, and finally she stopped speaking, realizing that whatever lived inside him tonight was larger than small talk, larger than routine, and when he finally lifted his head, she saw fear there, not the loud kind, but the deep quiet kind that settles in people who have been carrying a secret for too long. Daniel reached for his cup of tea, then stopped, his hand shaking just enough for Emma to notice, and that tiny movement sent a chill through her chest, because this was the man who had held her steady through job losses, family funerals, and years of uncertainty, the man who never shook, and now he looked like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. "Emma," he said, and her name sounded heavier than usual, like it carried weight, like it was about to be tied to something that could not be undone. And she leaned forward without thinking, her fingers curling around the edge of the table, her mind racing through every possible fear. Had he lost his job? Was he sick? Had he fallen out of love? But none of those guesses prepared her for the way his voice dropped when he continued, slow and careful. "I need to ask you something, and before I say it, I need you to promise you'll listen all the way through." And Emma nodded, though her chest felt tight, because promises made before knowing the truth were dangerous. Yet she trusted him enough to make it anyway. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching longer than the last, and outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and warning, as Daniel took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, looking straight at her like he was memorizing her face. "There's something inside me," he said, "something I pushed down for years, because I didn't want it to hurt you." And Emma felt tears sting her eyes, not because of sadness yet, but because of the honesty in his words, the kind that comes right before a life changes. He told her that lately he had been waking up with a heavy feeling, like time was running faster than it should, like the future was pressing closer, and he had started to feel trapped by his own silence, by the things he never said out loud, and the more he stayed quiet, the darker his thoughts became, not dangerous, not cruel, but heavy with fear and regret, and he was afraid that if he didn't face them now, they would poison everything they had built together. Emma listened, her mind struggling to keep up, her heart pulling between wanting to hold him and wanting to demand answers, but she stayed still, knowing this moment was fragile. Daniel finally said the words that made her breath catch, "I have a wish," and he paused, his jaw tightening, "and it's not an easy one." And the rain outside grew louder, as if the world itself was leaning in to hear. Emma asked quietly what he meant, and Daniel shook his head, saying he could not explain it all yet, only that the wish would ask her to trust him in a way she never had before, to step back when every instinct told her to hold on, and that scared him more than anything, because the last thing he wanted was to lose her. He told her that love, real love, sometimes asked for space instead of closeness, and even as he said it, his eyes filled with regret, like he hated the truth of it. Emma felt a sharp ache behind her ribs. Because marriage, to her, had always meant facing things side by side, never alone, and the idea of distance felt like the start of an ending. Yet she could see how much it cost him to speak, how long he must have fought himself before letting these words out. "If you say no," Daniel said, his voice barely above the sound of rain, "I'll understand, and I'll never ask again. But if you say yes, things may change, not because I want them to, but because they need to." And the room felt smaller. Suddenly, the walls closer, the future uncertain. Emma thought of the man she married, the one who laughed easily, who danced badly in the living room, who held her when her father died, and she realized that whatever this dark wish was, it came from the same heart that had always loved her deeply, even if it was now tangled in fear. The clock struck 9, sharp and loud, and Daniel finally reached across the table, his hand stopping just inches from hers, waiting, not daring to touch, and in that space between their fingers lived everything unspoken, every possible path their lives could take from this moment forward. Emma swallowed hard, her mind screaming for clarity, for safety, for certainty, but all she had was the man in front of her, asking not for answers, but for trust, and as the rain continued to fall, washing the night clean, she understood that whatever she chose next would mark the beginning of something new, something uncertain, and possibly something painful, and the question was no longer what Daniel's dark wish was, but whether love was strong enough to survive hearing it. The morning after Daniel's confession, the air between them felt fragile, like a thin glass waiting to crack, and Emma struggled to sleep as she watched him move around the kitchen, silent and methodical, making coffee without looking up, his presence both comforting and distant, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "I need to go away for a week," he said. And Emma froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly, because leaving had never been part of their plan. Daniel explained that he wanted to stay in a small cabin on the Oregon coast, alone, without calls or messages, a week of solitude to face thoughts he could not share, and Emma felt panic rise in her chest, her mind racing through every possible reason. Was he running from her? Was he ill? Was something worse coming? And yet, when she searched his eyes, she saw no deceit, only exhaustion and fear, the same fear that had haunted him at the kitchen table the night before. He tried to explain, saying that he had carried a weight all his life, a fear of losing himself, and that this week alone was not about abandoning her, but about finding courage, facing shadows he had ignored, confronting the darkness in his own mind so he could return fully to her, fully honest and whole. And his words were so sincere that Emma wanted to believe them, even as her heart protested. They argued softly, voices low, about the risks, the distance, the unknowns, about the strange emptiness that could grow in a week, and Daniel admitted he had tried to ask someone else, tried to find another way, but nothing worked, that this was the only path left, and Emma could feel the weight of his decision pressing on her, demanding a yes or a no, demanding trust she had never been asked for so sharply before. She thought of the mornings they had shared, the laughter in the kitchen, the way he had held her after her father's funeral, and she realized the hardest part was imagining those memories stretched into absence, a week of living without his hand in hers, without his voice nearby, without the small daily presence that had become her safety. Yet she also knew this request came from the same man who had always loved her, the man who had never lied, never run, and never asked for anything he could not face himself. And the weight of that realization made her chest ache, made her question whether love meant holding on tightly or letting go gently. Daniel spoke again. Softer this time, almost a whisper, telling her that he could not promise that everything would be easy, that he might wrestle with fear and doubt, that he might come back changed, but that staying meant living half a life, hiding himself, and he did not want that for them, for their marriage, for the life they had built. And the honesty in his words tore at her, because it was not a selfish wish, but a desperate attempt to save himself and, in doing so, save their love. Emma sat quietly, heart pounding, mind spinning, feeling every second stretch as the rain tapped against the window, a rhythm matching her rapid thoughts, and she thought about saying no, about refusing to let him go, about clinging to the safety of the known, yet something in her chest told her that saying yes was not surrender, but trust, and that real love sometimes demanded courage more than comfort. She finally nodded, her voice barely audible over the rain, saying yes, and in that single word, the room seemed to change, the tension lifting slightly but replaced by anticipation, because the next 7 days would be a test, a journey into the unknown, and neither of them could predict what truths would emerge, what fears would surface, what love would survive. And Daniel's eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow all at once, the kind of look that stays in memory long after the moment passes. As he packed the small bag, quiet and deliberate, Emma watched him, noticing details she had never before, the way his fingers lingered on the zipper, the slight slump of his shoulders, the tremor in his jaw, and she realized that this week apart was not just about him, but about them, about learning to love through absence, about understanding that devotion was sometimes measured in letting go. And she felt a strange mix of fear and hope, a pull toward the unknown that both terrified and compelled her, because the man she loved was asking her to trust him in the deepest way, and that trust, she knew, would define them both. The car ride to the cabin, though she did not accompany him, played in her mind over and over, imagining the gray coastline, the waves crashing, the wind whipping at his face, the solitude he would face, and every image brought a pang of longing and a strange relief, a sense that in facing darkness alone, he might emerge stronger, more honest, more present. and she could only wait. Her own days filled with the silence he had requested, the house echoing with absence, every corner whispering memories of his presence, until letters began arriving, one each day, written in his careful hand, filled with thoughts, fears, and truths he could not say aloud, and as she read each one, tears fell freely, understanding that his dark wish was not escape, but a courageous confrontation with himself, and that their love, fragile and tender, might survive the test of solitude stronger than ever. The first morning without Daniel, Emma woke to the quiet house, the kind of silence that pressed against her chest and made every corner feel empty, and she realized how much she had relied on his presence, his voice, the way he always left little notes or brewed coffee exactly the way she liked it. She moved through the day mechanically, touching his clothes, staring at the side of the bed where he usually slept, feeling a hollow ache that she could neither name nor soothe, and every small sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, reminded her he was not there, leaving her with only memories of laughter, shared routines, and the warmth of his hands in hers. Then the first letter arrived, slipped under the door, and Emma hesitated before opening it, fearing what words might hold, but the moment she unfolded the paper, his handwriting leapt off the page, intimate and familiar, carrying pieces of him that absence had made more vivid, and as she read, she discovered Daniel had begun to pour out everything he had kept hidden for years, his fears of losing her, his regrets about things he could not fix, the secret sorrow of feeling unworthy. Despite years of love, the private battles he had fought quietly so she would never see the cracks in his smile, and Emma felt tears run down her face as she realized that his silence had never been distance from her, but a shield he had built around himself to protect them both. Each letter that followed revealed more. Daniel writing about mornings watching the ocean, thinking about their first date, remembering the night they moved into this house, confessing the small, tender thoughts he had never spoken aloud, like how he still marveled at the way her hair fell over her shoulder, how he loved the sound of her laughter, and how much he feared that his hidden struggles might one day take him away from her. And with every sentence, Emma's heart expanded and contracted at once, a painful ache mixed with profound love, because she understood that his dark wish, the week alone, was not about escaping her or their life, but about facing the truths he could not face with company, truths that had haunted him silently for years. She read about his restless nights, the way he had turned over questions in his mind, the small victories he felt when he confronted fears that had seemed too large to touch, and the deep longing he had felt to come home renewed, ready to love her fully and without reservation. And Emma wept not only for his pain, but for the courage it had taken to confront it, courage that he had asked her to trust without knowing if she would understand. Each day, a new letter arrived, building a rhythm that became both comfort and torment, as she tracked his journey through his words, living vicariously in the cabin with him, feeling the wind off the coast, the chill of the mornings, the warmth of imagined fires, the solitude that had become his teacher. And she realized that through his writing, she was growing closer to him in ways she had never imagined, feeling his vulnerabilities, his raw emotions, and his love more deeply than any shared conversation had ever achieved. Emma reread letters over and over, memorizing sentences, pausing over phrases that made her heart ache, that revealed his inner struggle, that reminded her that love was not always measured in proximity or touch, but in honesty, trust, and the willingness to expose the deepest parts of oneself. As the days passed, Emma found herself changing too, learning patience, understanding the weight of silence, feeling the pull of absence deepen her empathy, and realizing that love could survive distance and uncertainty when rooted in trust. And with each letter, Daniel's presence grew in her mind and heart, even as his body remained far away, his words painting images of his experiences, confessions of fears, reflections on the life they had built, and tender reassurances of commitment, until she understood that what she had thought of as loss was actually a different kind of closeness, a love strengthened by honesty and shared vulnerability. She read about his private moments of fear, how he had cried alone, how he had confronted memories he had buried, how he had wondered if he could ever be worthy of her fully, and every detail made her ache and smile at once, because she knew that when he returned, he would not be the same man who had left, but a man who had faced himself, his darkness, and had come back ready to give her all of himself. And in that knowledge, Emma felt a mixture of longing, pride, and anticipation, a profound emotional tension that made her heart race with every letter. By the end of the week, she was trembling, both from exhaustion and from the intensity of feeling, because Daniel's journey, chronicled in ink and paper, had brought her to the edge of understanding love in its rawest form, showing her that sometimes absence teaches more than presence, that confronting fear alone strengthens both the individual and the bond they share, and that the greatest acts of love sometimes demand patience, courage, and silent support. And as she folded the last letter, her hand still shaking, she knew that when he returned, their reunion would be not just joyful, but transformative, for both of them, because the week apart had revealed that love could survive shadow, distance, and unspoken pain, emerging deeper, more tender, and more profound than either of them had ever imagined. The day Daniel returned, the sky over Seattle was gray, with clouds hanging low like they were holding their breath, and Emma waited at the door, her hands gripping the frame, heart pounding with a mix of fear, relief, and anticipation, because the past week had felt endless, filled with letters that had shown her his hidden fears, his courage, and the depth of his love, and now she was about to see him again, to feel whether the man who had gone away alone was the same man who had left, or someone changed forever. When the car pulled up, she saw him step out, tired, shoulders slightly slumped, eyes shadowed but clearer, calmer, as if carrying the weight of weeks had somehow refined him instead of breaking him, and she ran to him, throwing herself into his arms, letting the tears she had held back for days fall freely, while he held her as though he could keep her safe with the strength of his embrace alone. Inside the house, he set down his bags, and they sat together, close but not touching, each aware that the past week had altered the rhythm of their lives, yet had not broken the bond they shared. And finally, Daniel took her hands in his, looking into her eyes, and began to speak with the honesty that had been his guide during the solitary week, telling her everything he had faced, the fears he had confronted, the nights he had spent staring at the waves, feeling the enormity of life and mortality, wrestling with the secret sadness he had long hidden, and realizing how fragile and precious their love truly was. He confessed that he had gone away not to escape, but to prepare himself to face truths he could not share while living in the routines of daily life, truths about a medical concern he had kept hidden, about the anxiety that sometimes clouded his mind, about the fear of losing himself and, in turn, losing her. And as he spoke, Emma listened, her chest aching, her mind replaying every letter she had read, every tear she had shed, every moment of longing, understanding now that his dark wish had been a plea for trust, a request for space to become whole again so that their love could remain unbroken. Daniel told her that the doctors were hopeful, that the illness he had feared was treatable, and that his fear had been compounded by silence, by the shame of worrying her unnecessarily, by the habit of carrying burdens alone. And Emma felt a rush of relief and sorrow, relief that he was returning to her healthy and honest, sorrow for the pain he had endured in isolation, and admiration for the courage it had taken to ask her to let him go in the first place. They talked for hours, about the week apart, about the letters, about the moments when he had thought he could not bear the solitude, and Emma realized that his honesty had created a new intimacy between them, a closeness forged in trust and vulnerability, far stronger than the comfort of routine or physical proximity could ever achieve. And with each word, each confession, each glance, the tension in her chest softened, replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude and love that was raw, tender, and exhilarating all at once. Daniel reached for her hand again, squeezing gently, and asked the question that had haunted him since the start: if life became difficult, if fear and uncertainty returned, if they faced struggles again, would she still choose him, still trust him as she had that first night, when he revealed his dark wish? And Emma, without hesitation, replied with a quiet but firm certainty, "I already did," feeling the power of those words settle in her chest, carrying with them the weight of all the love, patience, and courage they had shared. In that moment, the room felt lighter, the gray sky outside seeming less heavy, the rain that had followed them during the week now distant and soft. As if nature itself acknowledged that a trial had been faced and survived, and for the first time in days, Emma allowed herself to believe that their love had not only endured the week apart, but had grown, transformed, and deepened in ways she could not have imagined, shaped by the truth, the honesty, and the courage Daniel had shown. As they sat together, side by side on the couch, holding hands, she thought about the letters she had read, the moments she had imagined him alone in the cabin. And she understood fully that his dark wish had not been about distance or avoidance, but about preparation, about confronting inner fears to return whole, about making sure that their future could be lived without secrets or shadows between them, and she realized that sometimes the hardest requests from those we love are the ones that show the deepest devotion. In the quiet that followed, they spoke less, letting the silence fill with understanding and shared relief, their hearts communicating what words could not fully capture, and Emma felt a profound sense of connection, a certainty that despite the darkness he had faced, the love between them had survived intact, stronger, and more beautiful because it had been tested and proven, and she knew that the trust they had rebuilt would carry them forward through any challenges, no matter how uncertain or difficult. The week apart, the letters, the fear, the longing, all of it had led to this reunion, a meeting of hearts that had been tempered in honesty, patience, and courage, and as Daniel wrapped his arms around her once more, Emma rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and understood with clarity that love is not only shown in the easy moments, but in the willingness to face darkness, to let go, to trust, and to return, fully and openly, to each other, stronger than before, ready to face the world together.